Welcome to Nasdaq TradeTalks, where we meet with the top thought leaders and strategists in emerging technologies, digital assets, the regulatory landscape, and capital markets. I'm your host, Jill Malandrino, and joining me on the desk at the Nasdaq market site is Keanini, Chief Technology Officer of DNS Filter, and Mark Ferrari, CEO of Latitude Information Security. We're here to discuss the most common and successful cyber attack methods and how to manage organizational risk. It is great to have the both of you with us. Welcome to TradeTalks. TK, give us a brief overview of where DNS Filter sits within the cyber ecosystem.
DNS Filter is a cybersecurity company that is doing its part to make the internet safer for everyone, not just the experts. We really take that to heart. DNS, the domain name system, is part of the global infrastructure. And so our technology, as the name suggests, we filter. We let through the good, we block the bad. On a global scale, what that means is we're looking at maybe 120 billion DNS requests per day. And out of that, maybe about 12 million is blocked. And what does that mean? Well, it means that your mom, dad, your partner didn't get hacked. Mm-hmm. So again, just really effective, because where we're positioned in the technology is just before the connection is made. So we have the first chance of doing good.
Yeah, I mean, those are astronomical numbers. And Mark, explain to us more on Latitude.
Sure, Latitude Information Security is a national cybersecurity consultancy. We work with organizations, large and small, to build their security programs and to assist them in meeting cybersecurity frameworks, complying with regulatory requirements, and ultimately helping them pick tools like TK's here, right, to secure their environment the best they can.
Right, and as technology evolves, Mark, so does the threat landscape as well. I mean, the smarter the good actors get, so do the bad actors. So what are the core challenges and threats that you're seeing within tech right now?
The challenges are that the attacks are relentless, and the attackers, malicious actors, are invariably one step ahead with respect to technology, because they don't have the same requirements of ensuring technology is sound and has the integrity that the good guys do, so to speak. The other challenge to that is you apply that technology to what is oftentimes an uninformed workforce, or workforce that doesn't understand that they're on the front lines of being attacked, which is why social engineering attacks are such a successful way of introducing malware and performing credential theft in organizations across the globe.
Right, and TK, it's not just specific to tech. I mean, it takes place across the entire enterprise. And not everyone has the technology know-how to mitigate these sorts of attacks. You don't think about it. You shouldn't have to think about it.
Yeah, I would go even further and say that every part of our lives, not just work. I mean, where we play, where we eat, where we fly, everything is affected by the cyber threat. And I mean, you'd be hard pressed to find somebody who hasn't been affected. Mm-hmm. In that way, you have to supply tools to these people who aren't experts. You shouldn't need a 4-year degree or 10 years of experience to be effective. You should be able to look at a page for a couple of minutes and actually be effective at your defenses.
Yeah, and so it's not just as simple as coming in and making sure that you're locking your computer screen, and it's so sophisticated now, especially with AI tools being deployed by the bad actors. It's hard to tell what some of these social engineering schemes look like. They look very real.
Very
real.
Very real. Yeah. We are in an age. I won't even say entering an age. We're in an age right now where our human senses are being fooled. Mm-hmm. The texts we read, the people we think we're talking to, the phone call we get, the voicemail, like deepfake, is very real. And again, we have to rely on. I think we're going to have to develop different methods more on the human side of authenticating each other. That phone call, that secret that only you and I know.
Right.
Because they're working on a global scale to actually this sort of art of deception.
Yeah. So I mean, breaking it down to make it more simple, Mark, it's basically blocking and tackling.
It is. I was about to jump in and say, that the complexity of the technology and the almost assuredness that there will be some malware, there will be an attacker that will get through, only underscores the fact that organizations can't ignore the basics. You have to know where your assets are. You have to limit access to the least possible degree, and you have to patch your vulnerabilities. I can't jump up and down on that one enough. When you're doing the basics correctly, once an attacker gets in, they will have a harder time getting left and right in your organization and affecting a larger scale impact on your organization. But in the end, you also have to expect that they will get in, and you have to have very, very sound incident response capabilities.
Yeah, let me just tag on to that. Since we're in the financial district here, you essentially, to sum that up, you have to make it more expensive for the adversary to operate. Okay. Or you want to raise their cost of doing business, because they're there to make money. They're going to probably hold you for ransomware or whatever it is. The more unattractive you are, meaning the chances of them getting caught, the chances of their attack not being successful, they're going to go hunt somebody else down. So if you're really expensive, and this again comes back to the basics and everything else, you are actually doing your best to fight cybercrime.
Yeah, especially for financial services, we're such a heavily regulated industry that you do have to invest in cyber protection. And to Mark's point, it's one thing to mitigate it, but should you have a breach, you have the response side as well. Right.
Yeah.
And I would imagine that's just as challenging as the mitigation part.
Yeah, and I'm sure you've gone through this too. I mean, if you protect a bank and you put all your tools there, the adversary will just go attack the customers of the bank. They can get the same amount of money. You see what I'm saying? So you have to really think holistically on where your defense perimeter is.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Mark, you served as a nuclear weapons officer in the U.S. Air Force, right? So you certainly understand risk, and thank you for your service, of course.
My pleasure.
Is it almost the same mindset where you go into it thinking, all right, not necessarily ROI, but what's my risk scenario?
Exactly. So, you have to look at things from a risk management perspective, a risk-informed perspective. First thing to do is an assessment of your risks. And a lot of organizations try to get away with self-assessments. You really need a thorough third party that specializes in that. Once you identify those risks, you've got to, if with limited resources, you have to start attacking the critical on down with a keen eye on your internet-facing assets. They're going to be the first ones. They're the ones that are continuously attacked and probed on a hour-to-hour, minute-to-minute basis, as you well know. So having a good risk assessment, getting an inventory of those, and then putting together a remediation plan. That's the key.
Yeah.
Too often, I think a lot of organizations are over-assessed and under-remediated, and that's that's key.
Balance.
And that's why I brought up that point before. It's one thing to mitigate it, but then you also have to have a response to it as well. And it's got to be a challenge quantifying brand value. It's very subjective, right? And that's just one piece of it. But if you have a revenue line down, a product line down, even if it's for a week, 2 weeks, if you're a public company, especially, it's going to impact the bottom line.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, even in financial planning, you set a target, you work backwards. In running risk mitigation, you work scenarios. You have these tabletop exercise. You pick a type of breach, and you work backwards. How is legal going to act? How is PR going to act? Is your technology going to hold up? All of these things. It's best to be prepared and have a plan than to be caught flat-footed.
That's an excellent point you brought up. You mentioned HR and legal, not just IT.
Right.
Information security is an organizational-wide discipline, and protecting that brand when you have to deal with a situation, you're going to need your communication staff, you're going to need your PR, you're going to need your legal and compliance to have all been in the room talking about these things with you beforehand. You don't want to exchange business cards in response to an incident. And so, again, that board-level commitment to cybersecurity is the first step in assuring that organizational-wide adoption of these practices.
Let's take it a little bit further there. And speaking of communication, how do you effectively communicate these needs to the C-suite and to the board? Because you're competing, there's multiple competing priorities. If you're thinking about it from a revenue perspective, you're thinking about it from a risk mitigation perspective, there's this rush to, let's use AI as an example. AI is nothing new, but the Gen AI is now part of the consumer vernacular. How do you present that need that cyber has to come first, but you really want to be thoughtful that you're not just spending money on the sake of deploying a product, you're actually solving a problem, and there's thoughtfulness around it.
So communicating to the board is a challenge, right? Because the nature of cybersecurity, the issues are very pervasive and very detail-oriented, which almost go against what you want to present to a board.
Right.
You can't get into too much detail. But the first thing, as you mentioned, you don't just want to spend money on tools. You need to look at your risk profile. Where do you need to spend money? But also, one of the least expensive things to implement is process. right? We've done well with the people part, we've done well with the technology part, and as TK and I were speaking beforehand, the marriage of the technology and the process is really where you get the most effectiveness.
Right. And it's something you can't deviate from too. It has to be sustainable. It's not just specific to just this one product that we're deploying. We just went through our cybersecurity training here at Nasdaq. That's why it's top of mind for me. But it's something that's ongoing. It's not just check off the boxes and we're done.
Yeah, I think it's a level of fitness, really. And I think the way we approach fitness is you can't just talk about it. You got to put the time in at the gym.
Right.
So I think companies are really coming around to it, and it's definitely they're certainly aware.
Right. Well, okay, let's talk about AI for a moment here. We know the opportunities that it represents. What are some of the challenges that it presents in the field of cyber? It's good for the good actors. It's also good for the bad actors.
Yeah, I think with it's another example of any great technology. It cuts both ways. It doesn't pick sides. Let's say that. And so yeah, we've definitely seen adversaries use it effectively. Well, it's our turn to do the same, right? And the real imbalance here is if you have a lot of human scale operations and you're not taking advantage of AI for your defenses, should an adversary show up with their machine scale attack, you really don't have a chance. So I think it's again it's not just technology you hand over. You have to hand over practice, how to use it safely, and you have to create habits around it so that it's not just something you're unfamiliar with on game day. Like you have had a level of fitness with this technology before you go into the game.
Right. Of course, the data governance becomes.
Absolutely, because AI really, the power is in the data that it works upon. And so understanding how is that data getting and where is it going and how is it being secured along those ways. But also kind of going back to the basics, you mentioned a secure bank is just going to be as weak as its next vendor.
Yeah.
And so when you're purchasing AI products, you could be purchasing vulnerabilities. You need to understand, you need to vet that third party a little bit deeper with respect to the AI. How was it coded? What sort of plug-in testing? What other types of testing has it undergone? So that you're not introducing, with the power of the AI, also some potential vulnerabilities.
Well, because if your third-party vendor gets breached, in theory, you could be vulnerable.
Absolutely.
As well. Do different types of businesses have different types of cyber attacks? For example, if you're a healthcare company versus a financial services company, is it just data at the end of the day that they're after, or is there specific attacks for different types of industries?
We work a great deal in healthcare, and up until recently, healthcare data itself was a prized possession.
Right.
So that was highly sought. However, identity, individual identity, and the effect of obtaining financial benefit from that is actually taking that over in terms of its popularity. So it's identity, it is data, of course, and it's there are other elements of attack where they don't necessarily want to take the data just to take it, but they want to take it to have an object which they can then leverage for extortion or ransomware purposes.
So it's not even like they're going after money anymore, like traditional extortion. It's the data and trying to value that.
We see it all.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, at a global scale.
120 billion units?
Yeah. And I mean, even the really nasty stuff, like the child sexual abuse material, we block that, and we block it really effectively. And I wish we didn't have to, but that's gone up like 5-fold since last year.
Yeah, it's almost like trying to moderate all these things as a person. It's impossible with the volume of messages that are coming through.
It just keeps on growing. And again, when you're a filter, all you can do is filter out the bad, right? And that through the good.
Yeah. How are companies receptive to hearing this? As you coach them along, and these are the types of solutions that you need to have. Is there any pushback when it comes to cyber strategy, or that? Or they don't want to hear that they're vulnerable in certain ways?
I think by and large it's been well socialized
Right.
that this is a prevailing vulnerability. Organizations that have been victimized are much more receptive to, okay, what do we need to do? It's a lot easier conversation. I do think it still is a challenge with those that haven't been. I think maybe because they haven't been, or they don't know they've been, is a point to make. But
that's a good point, yeah.
they might still have that idea that, well, it hasn't been me yet, so it might not be me, and that's really not the right approach.
Well, it's like having auto insurance, right? You don't want to have to get it after you've been in a car accident or flood insurance.
Right.
Just think about the conversation we're having now. 3 to 5 years, it could look very, very different as these technologies continue to evolve at a higher rate.
Yeah, I think so. I think, and again, I think what happens is the systems are going to become too complex to secure, and so we're going to have to move that complexity into the machines where it can be handled appropriately, and just respect, you know, what the limits of human knowledge is and cognition is. And so I think that's it. I guess the statement there is, you know, the complexity doesn't go away. It just gets moved away from the human.
Right. So, well, here's an interesting question, and this is just for my own knowledge and hopefully for the benefit of the audience. You're a cybersecurity professional, people on your team. When you come in, you sign in for the day, what are you doing? What are you monitoring? What does that look like? I mean, what keeps you up at night, in other words?
Yeah, well, like I said, I think what's really on the rise is this whole category of deception. It's just such an easy entry point to just fool the human. I mean, you know, con artists have been around us forever.
Right.
This is just the machine version of it. And once they have an open door, they'll go on and carry out whatever their campaign is. But you know, things like Christmas shopping, some political thing, or you know, big events that happen, you'll see a ton of new domain names appear. And they're there, and we block them.
Yeah.
But if you weren't, you know, you're one click away from being hacked most days.
Right.
And so, I think it's really important that we find ways to battle the threat with some kind of machine scale solution. Because again, I think the days of you applying a human scale defense, I think they're in the past.
Yeah, and I think speaking of campaigns, Mark, I think we'll get a crash course in the next couple of months to see really what the power, for lack of a better term, is with these technologies and what it can do on social media platforms as we're going into election cycle. Well, we are in the election cycle, and you know what that exposes and how we're able to process that information and discern what's real, what's not.
Exactly, and you know, as you mentioned, you know, the deep fakes are they're better than they ever have been. You can create someone's voice, someone's image, and make them say whatever you really want them to say. The problem is that sticks with them, as we were discussing earlier. And so, you know, you have to understand that, you know, that's out there. You have to educate your folks to understand. And I'll speak by way of example. I could today probably get a much higher phishing success rate with my client base if I put something out about the vice president selection from the Democratic Party. You know, people are interested in that. That's newsworthy. They're going to click on it right away. So any kind of hook that current events presents an attacker, they're going to seize upon, and they're going to present something to allow malware into the organization.
Yeah.
It's emotional, and it's acute. Like, you put those two things together, and the click's going to happen.
Yeah, especially if you have someone who's an influencer that perhaps didn't realize it was a fake, and then they sent that out. I mean, we just saw that recently. I think it was a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, where there was a fake announcement that President Carter had passed. And you know, outlets were starting to report it, and then you figured it was a deep fake. So it is something that's really real. But we appreciate both of your insights. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks, and thanks for joining me from MarketSite. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.